Hi there, folks. I'm Jim Knight. This is the Coaching Conversations. And today I'm talking to a longtime friend and mentor and colleague, Bill Sommers. William A. Sommers is the name, is on all the books, but I know him as Bill. I've got a little definition here. I guess your mom wrote this for you, Bill. I don't know who wrote this thing, but I'll just highlight a few things in your definition, in your description, in your bio. That's what I'm trying to say. You're a consultant for cognitive coaching, for adaptive schools, brain research, poverty, habits of mind, conflict management, classroom management strategies. You're on the board of the NSDC, now Learning Forward. You're actually president of Learning Forward. You're executive director for secondary curriculum, professional learning for Minneapolis Public Schools. You're a principal for 35 years. You've written over 10 books, co-authored 10 books. Some of them I've got here. The first one I saw, and this is really one of the first books about professional learning communities, was this one, Leading Professional Learning Communities. And got to work with a wonderful person, Shirley Hord, in writing this book.
Yep.
And then I've got the second edition. There's now a third edition out. And Reflective Practice to Improve Schools. This is kind of a classic book. This probably is one that people are using all the time, still looking at reflection. It defines reflection in many ways in professional organizations. And then this book, is this last year or 2 years ago?
2018.
Okay, so this is nine professional conversations to change our schools, a dashboard of options. And so what's useful about this book and really helpful is just the fact that you map out those 9 different kinds of conversations you can have at schools.
Look inside the cover.
Yeah, I thought there's a diagram here somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. So starting here and going here. So what's right here?
Well, you start with more reflection. One of my APs, Jane Stevenson, was a special ed teacher, and she said you start with the least restrictive alternative. So if reflection works, great, keep going. And then if that doesn't, then you start moving up the dashboard to more data-driven, trying to get more behavior-oriented.
Right.
And the last couple on the right side are more, this is not working, so you might need to find another job. So,
right.
But you don't do that very often.
Right. And so this would be really helpful for any principal or instructional coach who's looking at the nature of conversations. That's what it's.
Well, you need a repertoire. I mean, not one thing is going to work all the time, depending on the person. Especially
today when things are so crazy. And then the most recent book is called Responding to Resistance, 30 Strategies to Manage Conflict in Your School. We're going to spend some time on both these books, I think, if it's okay at the end, but I wanted to do what I'm calling an intellectual travelogue, or to go through the history of your experience. So 35 years as a principal, 10 books written, president of Learning Forward, but I've labeled you the best read person I know. And I've been thinking about that since I put it out on Twitter. Maybe it's not true. Maybe you're tied with Michael Fullen, but the two of you are head and head. I mean, there's no question that Michael's a great mentor of mine.
Yep.
But Michael's thinking, his reading is pretty focused, whereas yours is broader. So you've been a great mentor to me in terms of just turning me onto books and then reviewing the things I write, but also my coach. We did a stakeholder coaching process with my team where you interviewed everybody, came back and told me, this is things people like, but now I have a list of 29 things you need to work on. And then we picked one and worked on it. And you said you wouldn't be paid unless I changed. So that's
But you get better.
Unless I get better. So probably need to do it again, see how I'm doing with all those things. But the health part is, I'm actually doing the health part. So that's pretty good. And we're just good friends. We've had a chance to talk a lot. We probably talk once a month. And and you are, to me, the embodiment of the professional reader, a person who consumes books, learns books all the time. And so today what I want to talk about is, how do you go about reading books? And then who are the people who've influenced you? So maybe Maybe we could just start by, how did you come to be this person who reads all these books? What was it that got you started in the first place?
Well, I should even go back to, I literally grew up next to the tracks in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I mean, literally, my house, there's the tracks. My parents, my dad never got out of 5th grade. My mom never got out of 10th. So I just kind of an average kid and thought I was a jock. So I go to college to be a jock. And so after a couple years in architecture in 3 schools, I ended up at University of Northern Iowa's an old normal school and got hooked on self-paced instruction. So I was a physics major and taught a little chemistry. And I think it was really interesting because I didn't read. I mean, give me a problem, I'll work it out, math, physics, but who in the hell wants to read? It's a waste of time. So I go up to South High School in Minneapolis in the inner city and bring my self-paced instruction. And there for 5 years, and people kept saying, you should be an administrator, and I kept saying, get away from me. So anyway, I did 8 years as a knuckle buster, kick ass, take names. And my third principal.
You have an acronym for that, right? KETA?
What? Yeah, KETA, kicking the ass.
Right. Okay. I just want to get that out there.
They wouldn't let me put that in the book, so we didn't move.
All right.
So anyway,
move is
that's what move means.
The
yeah.
Euphemism for KETA. So if you buy this book, you should just wherever it says move, it's really KETA. Okay.
Yeah. Well, they've said you better not. I said, well, Sutton gets away with having the cool, but I don't have the name Sutton has.
Right.
So anyway, that was 8 years as a knuckle buster, and I had a principal who was a Marine Corps colonel, and the next one was another wrestler from Iowa. So my third principal was an ex-nun, Marnie Wamsley, and I went to her in '83 or '82, and I said, I'm gonna leave education. If kicking kids out of school and having hand-to-hand combat. She said, I want you to do 2 things. Well, she said one thing: if teachers got as excited about what they teach or how they teach as they do about what they teach, we'd be better off. I go, well, that's pretty interesting. And then she said, I want you to go see this guy named Art Costa. So it's '83. I'm sitting in a room with about 150 people, and Art, who I'd never met, said, I'm really not interested in what a kid does when he knows the answer to something. And I thought that was really stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said this, I'm really interested in what a kid does when he doesn't know the answer. And I will tell you that because of that, I'm in education. What does a principal do when they don't know the answer? What does a teacher do when you don't know the answer? So Art was quoting things, and he quoted this research about being efficacious out of a book called Peak Performers by Charles Garfield. And I go back, I'm going, I've had so much smoke blown up my pant leg. How do I know this guy knows anything? This is '83, by the way. What the hell is thinking skills? So
we had electricity back then at '83.
So I actually bought the book and read the book, and I found out 2 things. One is it did say what Art said it said, and there were some other things in there that were pretty interesting. I'm going, you can learn from a book? What a concept. So I don't know. I just started reading. So now I've read 1,200 books, and I got all kinds of book summaries and use them to write. So it was real serendipity, meeting the right person at the right time. And yeah.
So who were the first people? Was it Costa and Garmston, that if you were to sort of
tell your story? After seeing Art with the intelligent behaviors, it was 12 back then. It's now Habits of Mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then after about 2 times he came in to Minneapolis, and I said, I want more. And he said, well, we're just getting this thing called coaching going. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, here's an article, read it. And it was by Carl Glickman, and it was called Developing Teacher Thought. Developing Teacher Thought? What's that got? So I read it, I'm going, wow, an administrator can help teachers think through things. And they were developing um, cognitive coaching at the time. And then about a year later, they asked me to be in the training group where we were just trying to figure out what works. So there
Mhm.
wasn't a book or anything like that. It was a 3-ring binder. We'd throw stuff out, try new stuff, and that's where I met Diane Zimmerman, and she and I did. She helped me through the first training I ever did in cognitive coaching. So Art's been my consistent mentor for 30 some years.
So now you still talk to him once a month. Is that right?
Oh yeah, once a month. And if I want coaching, I will talk to Art Costner or Diane Zimmerman are my two go-to
Hmm.
people. Now that doesn't mean I haven't learned from a lot of other people.
Right. But just tell me about what you've learned from Art.
Well, one is that what goes on in your head when you teach. So what are the processes that go on? And I will tell you the reason I did my dissertation on reflective thought was that I was so impulsive as a principal. Get it done or I'll hurt you. Do
Right.
something. God. And so he kept talking about reducing impulsivity and the other intelligent behaviors. And that became, okay, I'm impulsive. How can I mediate that? So he led me to work with Feuerstein and many other people. And so having that reflective time, and of course now Kahneman, system
Mhm.
one and system two. I mean, there's all kinds of shown and arduous. There's a lot of stuff on the business side, but it wasn't hidden education.
Mhm.
So, and I think that was the other thing that when you said broad um, at the University of Minnesota, I just wanted my, doctorate. And they said, well, you've got all the education courses. I said, great, let me write the paper and now I'm out of here. He said, no, the university wants 45 hours. You're going to have to pay for 45 hours. So they wouldn't let me do it in astronomy. So I went over to business school
Hmm.
and that opened up a whole new genre that I never even knew existed.
Hmm.
So I think you get out of your education's got some great stuff, but they don't have the answer. Business doesn't have the answer either. But the more repertoire you have, the more ideas you have, I think the better you show up in a conversation and you're able to mediate someone else's thinking. So really what Art kept talking about is how can you be the mediator of somebody else's thinking because they have to do it. As a principal, you're not going to be in there 180 days, although there have been times I've been in there 60 days when it wasn't
Hmm.
working. Only 4 times do I ever had to take a teacher out in 40 years. So
Hmm.
that's not where you want to spend your time.
No. So tell me more about why you think it's important to be a reader. And maybe another way to put this is you've probably had staff who were like you who said, "No, I'm not really a reader. I don't like to read. It's not
Right,
really my thing. I'd rather do something else."
right.
You know, why is reading important? And then what do you say to somebody who says, "I'm just not really a reader"?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is if you only know one way to do something, you're limited in who you will have influence with. Bob Garson said this years ago. The one who has the most flexibility has the most influence in the conversation.
Hmm.
So I had to, when I'm working with teachers that they're not as good as they want to be, or things are not working. What else can you do? Are you flexible enough to try something else? So I get ideas from a whole different. I read a business book. Well, you know, Rich Sheridan, Joy Inc.
Hmm.
I was at a parent. They had me for dinner, and I looked in their Joy Inc. What kind of book is that? And the woman worked for Northwest Airlines or some health system. She said, "I think you would like it." And so I read the book and fell in love with it. Called Rich Sheridan. I said, "I want to come and see you." He said, "Well, we do these tours." I don't want a tour. I want to talk to you. And he was nice enough. So I flew to Ann Arbor, sit down and spend a day with him. Actually, I took Art with me too.
Okay.
So that's what started that whole genre. So uh, when I read something that piques my interest and I think can help me be a better leader, a better educator, a better learner, then I call them up and see if I can spend time with them. That's how Learning Omnivore started,
Mhm.
was let's find somebody who we can learn from, and anybody wants to join me. So we got 25, 30 people, and I've been grateful to some of the big hitters in America.
Well, I want to come back to that learning omnivore as part of your
Okay.
professional learning, but what is somebody missing if they're not reading professional?
Well, if they're not reading, you probably have found things that work for you if you've been in the education for a while. Anybody listening to this think that education or the kids, the community is going to be the same as it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Get over it. This is going to continue to change. I mean, who could see COVID coming?
Mm-mm.
I think that's pressing all of us. So if you read, you get an idea. Now, I also know, I think I saw this statistic years ago where Ed Week, they had, I want to say, 20,000 subscriptions. And when they found out there's only 2,000 people actually reading any of it.
Hmm.
So, the first answer you're going to get is, I'm too busy. Okay. So then you're limited to what you know and limited to the kids that'll work with. What I'm suggesting is you read more, you widen your repertoire, and something might pique another person. So when I walk down the hall as a principal, by the way, I haven't been a principal for 4 years. So if anybody is looking for a principal, call me. I'm ready. I am so bored I can't stand it. I like to do it rather than just write about it. So
Right.
so anyway, the more repertoire you have, who knows who you're going to run into as a teacher, as a professional, whatever. And if I can then say, here's another idea, I can't force you to do it, but here's something, and you'll find your best learners can't wait to jump into something new and get a new idea.
So I guess what I hear you saying is, if you don't read, you're really impoverishing your capacity to get better at what you do. You're limited by your limited experience, whereas a book can give you ideas and you go, oh, I never thought about that. The book expands your world. Is that
Correct.
the heart of it?
Well, that, and it's also better if you can do it in concert with other people. I mean,
Right.
think of Vygotsky. This is social. So if you can do a book study with someone, and I did that early in my, early in my reading, I'd find somebody who wanted to read the same book, and so then we would talk back and forth. You go to workshops. There's ways to expand. Reading's just one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how did we met at National Staff Development? We were sitting in the same session. I'm going, Jim Knight, I've heard of him, and I'm sitting next to him. What's that about? So, you just never know who you're going to run into.
Right. So after Costa and Garmston, although their impact, and in particular, Art Costa is who you've worked a lot with. Yeah. After their influence, who would be another person whose work really shaped your thinking? Yeah,
I think Pat Wolf was the next person in. She lived in Napa, and I joined her group of trainers called the Brainy Bunch. Mm-hmm. And we were together for 25 years. We would see some, new neuroscientists, and then try to figure out, what can we use in schools. She now has retired, unfortunately, but there's about 10 or 12 of us that still get on a session once every month or every other month saying, what are you reading? What are you doing? Because we want to keep the conversation alive to who's doing what, who's trying something in school. So there's like 10 people that I kind of hang out with.
So how did that come to be set up, that group with Pat Wolf?
Well,
the Brainy Bunch.
Art and Pat were really good friends, and then Pat was doing pre-conferences at Learning. I'll always go back to National Staff Development, but now Learning Forward.
Right.
So I went to Pat Wolf's session. I'm going, wow, there's some constructs here that I can really use in terms of not only my leadership, but in terms of teaching. So again, I was fortunate to. Okay, I'm probably telling tales out of. It used to be a principal could go to a workshop, and somebody said, "Well, you want to go to the principal's workshop, national principals or the AP workshop?" And they said, no, I know how to swear and I know how to drink. What am I going to learn? So fortunately, I got to National Staff Development, which was kind of the edge group at the time. And, you know, Dennis Sparks and Stephanie Hirsch were just wonderful to work with. And, you know, I just kind of fell into it. It wasn't any design, but I was very fortunate to see some really great people there.
Yeah, Dennis would be another one on that list of really well-read people for sure.
Yeah, very thoughtful guy. Yeah.
So then tell me about learning omnivores, because this is a whole different thing. So tell me about that, how that came to be.
Well, in the early days of cognitive coaching, Bob and Art would sponsor at ASCD or someplace. They would bring in like a John Saphir, Bob Samples, Bob Chadwick, Suzanne Bailey, some of the really good people. A lot of them are, like Bob just passed, Angelos Arian has passed. So they would bring in several people. Well, when Bob and Art sold cognitive coaching, I think in the late 90s, Diane and I kept this really good relationship. She was a superintendent, and I was still principal, which I never wanted to be a superintendent. That's a whole other story. But anyway, Diane and I just had this great. Whenever we got together, we would just share what we talked about. And so, somewhere about 15 years ago, Diane and I said, we really, in the old days of cognitive coaching, we really would get together with a guru or somebody expert, and we would all learn from them. So I said, well, let's start it. So the first time we started it was Art Costa was in Pat Wolf's living room with 20 people. And that started learning omnivores. The next year we went back to Napa and had David Perkins from Harvard come, and watching Art Costa coach David Perkins in front of 50 people. I was shocked. From then on, I'm being, wow, what a gift. So then Diane and I said, well, I bet we can get more people if we go to their town. So learning omnivores became, we're going to learn from somebody. And so I would call like a Peter Block, who's a business guy, but fantastic. I've learned something from people, every one of these. So we go to Cincinnati. So we started going to wherever they were because they didn't have to travel and whatever, and they would do it for a hell of a lot less money. So we just keep going. We got Sally Helgeson a year from now. COVID's kind of put us on a year hold. Right. So we've got her scheduled for October. Not this October, a year from now.
Well, this October 22nd, I'm going to interview her, thanks to you in setting that up. And she wrote that book called How Women Rise.
But she's been in women leadership for years. She's wonderful. Yeah.
So what are a couple highlights of your learning omnivores experiences? If you look back over all the ones you've gone, you've gone to see people like you said, Peter Block, Edgar Schein, Margaret Wheatley. You think of somebody who's a big name and
Edgar Schein, was the guru of organizational development at MIT.
Right.
And we've been able to get him twice, even though he's moved to the Bay Area because his son lives out there. But he is obviously one of the deepest thinkers I've ever been around. Andy Hargraves is always.
Let's talk about it. So what did you learn from Edgar Schein? What's a couple important lessons?
And he's in the 9 professional. He's the second one, Humble Inquiry.
Right.
And his first book, he had several books, but Helping talks about level the playing field. Because if it's a one up, one down, you're probably not going to get very far. So just his nature about what keeps you up at night. What do you want to learn? This is the problem. What'd you do? What would you do differently? I mean, just his approach. He comes out of a therapeutic background, but he is just dynamite in terms of organization. One of the things he did was he was working with his leadership team. And I've had this experience where he's talking to a leadership team and they say, well, we never get to talk about what we really believe and whatever. And he says, why does that happen? Well, we never get to it. He said, well, who sets the agenda? And the CEO says, Well, my secretary, he said, get your secretary in here. How do you set the agenda? She said, in order as anybody calls in. So you don't prioritize what's the most important. I'm going,
Right.
God, what a gift. So, and I've used that several times with some district or leadership teams that never seem to talk about kid learning. They talk about buses. You know,
Mhm.
you put my killer bees, buses, boundaries, and budgets.
Right.
You put that in unmistakable impact. So, um,
Well,
anyway,
I think for me, Shine, uh, that whole idea of how status interferes with our ability to
great,
communicate effectively, and that
correct.
once we take status out of it, the conversation opens up. Like you said, that one up, one down, and people perceive us as putting ourselves one up, and then he's got all those books, Helping being the first one, then Humble Inquiry, and I forget what.
Yep.
And
Well, one of
actually,
the
even his consulting work before that was
well,
preliminary to that.
one of the number one goals of cognitive coaching was build trust first. If you don't have
Right.
trust, you're not going anywhere. I mean,
Right.
people will cover, and you never get to the real issues. So, anyway,
Well, I want to explore a couple more. What are a couple more highlights from your learning omnivores? How many people have you seen? I'm going to change my
oh,
question.
I don't know, 20 maybe. It's
Probably more than that.
well, probably more than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
One that sticks out is John Saphir.
Mm-hmm.
Um, his book, High Expectation Teaching: 50 Ways to Prove to Kids They're Smart.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing work. And John is just a solid researcher, and I just hold him in such high regard. Ellie Drago Segerson on her adult development through teaching. It's amazing work. She has been huge, confident, not a confident, but, a huge mentor as well. Tony Wagner, um, what's the creative innovators and the global achievement gap. And he and Dinner Smith wrote the book Most Likely to Succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Dinner Smith, who I've never met, but the book is What School Could Be. He went to
Right.
every state to find schools that were doing it where you said it couldn't be done.
Hmm.
Amazing. Bob Chadwick, of course, being he's passed on now, but he changed my idea on how to deal with conflict. It's not
Hmm.
something to be scared of. It could be an energy source. Richard Sheridan, uh, joy in the workplace, and how do you manage people so that they work together and collaborate. And the one I'm following right now, in 2015, I didn't think I had enough strategies. So I read this book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There,
Right.
by Marshall Goldsmith. And you had him as a, keynoter last year in Kansas City.
Right.
So when I read that book, I'm going, wow. So I went and took the training, and Frank Wagner is the number 2 guy, and I took the training from Frank, and that's where stakeholder coaching comes in. And so I pretty much do a lot of stakeholder coaching with educators now.
Mm-hmm.
You want to find out who, if I'm a leader, I want to know my APs and teachers. They're the ones that are receiving my leadership. Well, do they think I'm doing okay or not? And if not, what can I work on to get better?
Right.
So you have to have courage to do that, humility to listen, and you got a discipline to follow through. So I've learned tons from him and Frank.
Marshall was one of the first people to, through his books, teach me about coaching. And his books that came out, he's got really one big, massive volume with all these
Yeah.
articles about coaching. There really wasn't much back in 2004, 2003. No. And then of course that book is really, really, really a powerful book. But the stakeholder coaching, I think you said something really important. Look, I think we're afraid to learn a lot at the time.
Yeah.
And I think people I see that with video, like I don't really want to watch video of my lesson. Well, why not? I mean, you don't want to get better, like I know it's painful to improve, but it's more painful to not be successful, like to pretend you're successful when you're not,
Well, when you wrote the video conferencing book,
Right.
You know me, I was a principal at the time in a middle school and
Right.
walked down to Tony and said, will you do this? So we started doing it on his laptop, well, his iPad,
Right.
and it was amazing.
Yeah. But I mean, that's just an example of how people
Right.
are, they
Well,
hesitate to learn.
That's that humility that Marshall talks about. Are you humble enough to learn from people who can give you the best feedback? Now, you don't want people who want to sandbag you just because
Right.
they don't like you, but you also don't want somebody who's going to put whipped cream on horse dung and tell you when everything's. I'm sorry, I moved to Texas,
That's
so
okay. You live in Texas now.
well, if you're just smoothing everything over, that's not helpful either.
No, no, I don't think you can move forward by hiding from the truth.
No.
I think that's absolutely true. So when you read a book, how do you do it? Like how do you go about reading a book? I mean, I know
Well,
we start at the beginning, we finish at the end, but do you
yeah.
take notes? Do you highlight? What do you do?
First thing I do is I highlight in dog ear and flag it and whatever and hash mark. If it's something I really think is good, it gets 3 hash marks or a flag or a
Mhm.
dog ear. So once I get through it, what's getting the best parts that I think are really worthwhile,
Right.
then I go back and I put notes together.
Let me make sure I got this. So your book, let's say I'm reading this book.
Yeah,
So either I put a little sticky flag on it,
flag on it or I
or
underline it.
underline it, and I might turn the page if I don't have my stickies.
Yeah, if I underline it, it's something that's interesting. But if it's something that goes, whoa, I can use that, hash mark that sucker because I want to go back to it.
But what do you mean hash mark?
Well, I'll put three hash marks to the side of the
Oh, okay.
passage.
All right, great. So you underline lots of stuff, but the really important stuff, you mark them off.
Right. Then I go back, which is really forced review because I got to get it in deep. I'm not very smart, so
Right.
I got to be able to do this. So I go back and I used to type every word in with my little fingers.
Uh-huh.
Then I went to dictate or some darn thing. And then because I started mumbling, then I had to go back and do it anyway.
Right.
And then my son about 2 years ago found this iPen,
Right.
zap, and it goes right into the file.
Huh.
So then I've got the really juicy parts. And so then what I do is one of two things. I find somebody that I can tell what I learned.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times that's Skip Olson, former business agent for Minneapolis Federation of Teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So I find Diane or somebody who will listen to me, tell them what I learned. Diane is good. Well, what'd you learn out of the book? Damn.
Mm-hmm.
So because I want to stay it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to either, on my Learning Omnivore website, I do book summaries. So I might take 20 pages of notes, but I try to get to 5 or 6. And I put, so then that also is another forced review for me. And then ultimately, if I'm writing a book or an article or something, I write new rules on there, something that irritates me, or let's do something different. Like my first one was stand up or shut up. I'm
Right.
tired of the whining. If you want to whine, go away. Go sell shoes. Don't tell me it can't be done. I've come out of retirement 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say it was easy. It's
Right.
not easy. Strap on your iron underwear and have at it.
Right. So you've got how many of these, and you call them summaries, how many of them do you have?
It's over 1,200. I lost count.
Yeah. And,
and I have to be honest with you. Sometimes I read defensive reading. This book sucks, but I'm going to get the 5 things out of it. But because when you're on your feet in front of a group and you say, "Have you read such and such?" Well, maybe I haven't read it, but if I have, I can say, "Well, yeah, it said this, but I'm not sure I agree with that."
Right.
So, and I'll go into spirituality and different things, but I want to get a broad brush because what they do in business, in education, creativity, who knows where you get an idea.
Sociology and psychology are a big part of it too.
Yeah, yeah.
So the summaries might be like 20 pages long for each book, right?
For me, yeah.
Yeah. And you've got over 1,200 of these things. How do you find these books?
A lot of it's like if Andy Hargreaves suggests a book, I'm probably going to read that because he is one sharp dude. If Marshall or Frank is one gives me books that he thinks I should read.
Hmm.
Another one I'm reading right now and took the training to be polarity management.
Hmm.
Barry Johnson back in the '90s did polarity management, where you got it's a it's a polarity to man. He's not a problem to solve. And then also in the books that I read, they may refer to something else, and I'm going to, okay, I got to go get that book. So then, I spend too much money on books, but I, just find some thread that I want to know. So I want to get no more of it. So Andy, sometimes I'll say, what's the primary research? And I'll say, should I read the primary research? And he'll tell me, no, here's the three things you need to know. Or he'll say, yeah, you probably ought to read that one because you get a background, especially around professional advocacy.
Now you listed Andy Hargraves as one of
Yeah.
your people who's what's his influence on you been?
Well, you go back to sustainable leadership. We went to Boston and had him do a couple of days on that. And before that, teaching as a knowledge worker, something like that was an older book. And I thought, whoa, he was the first one that I saw take education as a knowledge worker because it was in the business literature. The other thing about business, they usually are 2 or 3 years ahead of what we do in education. So then I started tracking Andy with the Fourth Way. His latest book, Professional Collaboration, is outstanding. 10 different things to build teamwork. I think he led me to Amy Edmondson out of UPenn on teaming and psychological safety, called, what the heck is it? A Fearless Organization. Yeah, a fantastic book. So now I sometimes in the middle of the night go, ooh, I haven't thought about this book. And the one I'm working on now for a book summary is called, The Tyranny of Dead Ideas. So, so that's going to be coming out sometime this month, and then I'll write a rule because I wrote The Tyranny of War,
Right.
talking about polarity management. We need it both and. So I think I'm going to follow that up with The Tyranny of Dead Ideas.
So you do share your summaries though on Twitter, right?
On Twitter because of you, because I remember you 2 years ago saying, you really got to write this stuff up. And I'm going, I don't do that kind of crap. And then you embarrassed the heck out of me and you signed me up, Bill Sommers 8. I didn't even know what I signed up for. So but it's your fault.
Right.
It's like Art Casa's fault for me reading. And then I forget, somebody got me on LinkedIn, so I put stuff on LinkedIn too.
Right.
I refuse to do Facebook.
So is it William Sommers 8? Is that what it is?
Bill Sommers 8.
Bill Sommers 8. Okay. And so you've got there's blogs you do. What do you call the blogs again?
Well, the blog for me, I don't know what really a blog is, but I write new rules for education.
Right. New rules for education. And then, but you include the summaries too. So if people
Well,
follow
the summaries,
you,
yeah, I've got what are we reading? So on the book summaries. So
right.
I got the new rule idea sitting in a hotel room when I didn't have HBO. Bill Maher comes on, new rules. I'm going, new rules. Cool. Let's do something different.
So Joellen Killian once told me, you should go to Bill Sommers' house just to see the books. So what's it look like if I was to go in? What would I see? Is there like books everywhere? I have this picture of like a desk just surrounded by heaps of books.
You look behind you, and I've got about 8 of those, but you've got more than I do. So now I'm jealous. I'm going to have to buy more bookshelves.
Yeah. Well, as you look back on this sort of intellectual journey you've been on, is there anything you regret related to your professional learning where you say, looking back, I really wish I'd done more of this or less of that?
Well, I don't. Frank Wagner, who works with Marshall Goldsmith, told me a few months ago, his goal is to live a regret-free life.
Uh-huh.
And I've really taken that to heart. So
That's because he's regretting all the regrets he's had.
no, it's just, so if I don't know if it's a regret because I didn't know any better at the time.
Mm.
So I thought I was going to school to be a jock.
Mm-hmm.
But my mom, who was a hard worker, both my parents were, I knew how to work. And my mom, who was a caterer and a house cleaner for the people on the east side of Cedar Rapids, always said, "You're going to college." I really didn't know what the heck that meant.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, okay, I'm going to college, but I thought it was to be a jock. So after my third knee operation or second knee operation at Iowa State Wrestling, what am I going to do with my life?
Mm-hmm.
So I transferred, University of Northern Iowa. So I guess I could have done things quicker, but sometimes it's the timing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember who said this, but every time the student's ready, a teacher appears.
Mm-hmm.
I am so grateful to teachers that keep appearing for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I mean, I'm just really thankful and grateful for the people who've shown up in my life at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
So I've made some financial mistakes. Being a principal, I got in a bad mood and took on a couple of superintendents that I regret that. I could have done it differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm smarter than I showed. And
Mm-hmm.
my ego got hooked, and that's the downside
Mm.
because I want to work with kids and staff.
Right.
And so I regret a couple of those that I could have done better.
It's called being human, I think.
Yeah.
I think, well, I've heard a couple things. So there are people who are kind of like intellectual shapers or thinkers in your life.
Right.
And then there are mentors. And then there's community. And you've got the brainy bunch, you've got the learning omnivores, the community. Do you see those? Tell me a bit about how they function in your life.
Well, let me, first of all, I want you to know that because I was so bored with COVID, being on the road, and then all of a sudden 5 months I'm sitting on my rear end.
Mm-hmm.
I called a former Spanish teacher who was one of the best ones that I've ever seen. I said, "Even though you're retired, will you teach me Spanish?" So I'm taking Spanish lessons.
Good for you.
Twice a week. I live in Texas, for crying out loud.
Right.
So, now my daughter was a double major in French and Spanish, but put that aside. Years ago, Suzanne Bailey told me that I was a synthesizer. And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, a lot of people get really deep and really smart in one area." She said, "As long as I've known you, you always take from many different walks of life."
Mm-hmm.
One thing I didn't mention to you is I'm on the board of an improv group.
Mm-hmm.
I started taking improv as a principal. I said, as a principal, my life's improv anyway. I better get better at it. So I started taking lessons. And Stevie Ray, who is a improv comedy club in Minneapolis, I kept saying, "Would you do this for my staff?" And so about 5 different schools, he's come out and done things on creativity and teamwork and communications and whatever. So once I, took quite a few, I've never been a performer, quite frankly, but he asked me to be on his board. So I've been on the board for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. But I love improv because Mary Catherine Basin, in her book called Composing a Life,
Mm-hmm.
said life is improv.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty true. You can't see what's coming.
She's Margaret Mead's daughter, right?
Well, yeah, Margaret Mead and Jeffrey Basin? No.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so to me, learning is somewhat improv. Again, going back to repertoire.
Right.
The more repertoire you have, the better able you're to deal with a problem coming down the road. And then there are times when, 30 ways to manage conflict. One of my parents who worked for 3M said at the time, "You have 25 ways to deal with conflict. Why would you have 25 ways? And my response was, I have 24 and none of them worked. And I'm looking for 26. So don't tell anybody, but I have 3 more that I
Yeah,
didn't
I know.
write
Well,
about.
I want to hear what the other. I want to hear what the other 3 are. Well, let's talk about that book. So the book's called "Responding to Resistance: 30 Strategies to Manage Conflict in Your Schools." You got a lovely cover here of people looking unhappy. So,
Yeah.
Solution Tree book. So give me a couple gems from this book.
Well, I wrote responding to resistance because it was the 4th rule that Jen Abrams, and I've known Jen for quite a while, and that was swimming in the deep end. That was their 4th point. I've been looking for a place to write about my conflict strategies. Um, One is there's some foundational skills up front, linguistic skills, because if you can't define the problem, you can't solve it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't define the problem, it never gets into your working memory. It's out there and you spend a lot of time and energy.
Right.
Then I moved to collaborative small groups because most of us are working in small groups, leadership team, grade level, department chair, sometimes, a school. So I started looking, what do you have to do in terms of collaborations and strategies to make meetings work, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Then I go to individual. Now, everything in there, let me just be really upfront. Everything in there I have used personally. Every one of them have worked.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the other side of that. Every one of them hasn't worked. So if you think you can pick one out and say, I'm done, it ain't happening. So you need multiple. Some are going to be better for people than others. So then I moved to large group. What do you do when the large group is having trouble? How do you focus them on getting through a major issue that's hitting your school or hitting your district? And then my last chapter, I give 3 or 4 on what do you do when nothing works.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry if you think you can solve everything. It's just not going to happen. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be effective and influence what happens, but not everything is solvable. Sometimes you have to manage it, which
Right.
drove me to the new polarity partnership. Leslie DePaul is working with Barry Johnson, and I'm just reading their brand new book called And.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm about 5 chapters in. So look for that one in a month or so.
Yeah, and the polarity is about recognizing that it's not like I wrote a little column about this a while ago on Radical Learners. We get stuck in binary thinking, thinking it's either
Correct.
this or it's that,
Yep.
and either we care about the kids emotionally or we worry about achievement. But no, we can do both.
It's both and.
Right.
Well, a good one for principals is you've got the old guard, experienced people who've been there. You got young people coming in who don't have experience. The answer is not to wipe out one or the other. You need both.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And yeah, obviously there's some downsides, but this is a process that now that I'm certified in it, I'm looking forward to trying to work on that more. I mean,
Right.
I've used it in my own, administration, but I'm looking for some more ideas on polarities that we can work on. And
Okay, so what are the 3 that are not in here?
hell if I know. Well, one is there's a book called Try and Make Me,
Right.
and it's really about kids. But I think a lot of times the adults are like kids.
Mm-hmm.
But they said that's too kid focused. Let's just keep it as a. I gotta look at which 3. I've got it on another sheet here. Okay. You had to ask me, didn't you? I should have been prepared. Okay. So and learn improv skills.
Right.
And the other one is a book by actually a professor at Rice told me about a book called Getting the Right Fight. So it's called Get the Right Fight. You can't fight everything, and if it isn't the right fight, there's no point fighting something that you have no control over.
Right.
So
that's like the experience you have where you'll go to like a rental car place.
Yeah.
Back when I used to do that, and the guy will say, well, I won't do it again, but I'll do it now. I'm going to give you this, I'm like, why tell me that? Why give me the break and then make me feel bad about it? Like, just give me the break,
Right, right.
You gotta choose your things.
I'm executive elite. Give me the damn car.
So, I think this is your best book.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's filled with vignettes that I try to make them come alive.
Like, I think it's really a practical, useful book. You can pick it up, you can use it. It's got wise ideas in it, and it talks about individuals, teams, groups,
Thank you.
I think it's, anybody who's in any kind of a coach or a leadership position could use this book, but it's not to say this one stinks though. So tell us about this one. This is really great too.
Yeah, well, I really like that. First of all, Diane and I just love working with her, and the graphic that you showed,
right,
was done by an 18-year-old kid, a grandson of a friend of mine. He put it. I thought, God, this is great.
Right.
And so
let me
now,
pull it up again here.
Well, and that's another example where Diane and I had to come up with 9. We just decided to do 9, but there are other organizers that we could have used.
Right.
I want to get people going, so I don't think higher ed is doing as good a job as they could with preparing leaders in this crazy world. So I have my 7 C's, and one is conflict, and one is change, and one is collaboration, one is coaching. You got to have repertoire, in my opinion.
So let me give you the titles of the different parts, and then you give me just a couple sentences on each one.
Yeah.
So is that okay? So reflective conversations.
Well, reflective conversations we wrote based on Donald Schoen and Chris Ardress from Harvard.
Right.
We talked about reflection on action, which is before.
Right.
Reflection in action, which we don't talk about a lot, but Gary Klein wrote a great book on that. What's happening? You're in front of the classroom. This ain't working. What are you going to do? Because you're in, and then reflecting forward, which I'll give a plug to Marshall Goldsmith. He talks about feed forward.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn from what happened, but you really got to think about it. So the second one is shine, which we kind of talked about. The third one is cognitive coaching. I think one of the big things that Art and Bob did, they call it states of mind. It's a sort that I use. Is the person being efficacious? Am I, because you got to be able to do it. Are you flexible? Do you have multiple strategies?
Right.
Crafts-like, do you know how to, what's the data? How will you know it's working? Consciousness, what are you aware of? So I ask a lot of questions because I don't want to go over the same stuff if they already got it. And then the fifth one that came much later in our group was interdependence. You're working interdependently.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is SCARF by David Rock, the neuroscientist. And I just had this yesterday, a person I'm coaching in a Chick-fil-A, as a matter of fact. She said, I've got this person who is wonderful with people, but she's not technically correct.
Uh-huh.
And so I said, she keeps coming and wants a title. Mm-hmm. I said, so it's status. SCARF S is a status.
Right.
Me is some people want certainty. Right. Some people want autonomy. Some want relatedness, and some want fairness.
Right.
If you know what that is, then you can coach around that. Mm-hmm. And of course, Marshall Goldsmith is find people who work for you and with you who will give you honest feedback, and you're willing to take the feedback, pick 1 or 2 things. You know that process, and that's what we're going to coach around for a while. And if you don't get better, I don't get paid.
Right.
Or some people now are not interested in doing that. They just pay me a monthly fee. The next one is Bob Chadwick on conflict. You get into conflict.
Oh, you skip positive deviance.
Positive deviance. Jerry Sternad.
Right.
Jerry Sternad, who again passed now, but he worked with starving kids in Vietnam.
Right.
He's worked with Appalachian people who need special needs. Mm-hmm. All kinds of social issues. So he shows up and says, do you have people in Vietnam? you have some people or some kids that are healthy. They said, yeah, we don't care about them. He said, but what are they doing? They're living in the same squalor.
Right.
What are you doing? So he kept asking questions. So how many times has somebody said, well, I can't do it with these kids? Well, my answer, if you really believe that, you need to find another job.
Mm-hmm.
Because Martha down the hallway is working with those kids and she's getting results. So how do we do that? Okay.
So before you move on, let me just say, I think that right now, when things are so uncertain and people are trying so many things, I think positive deviance is really a wise way to go. Let's figure out of all this remote, hybrid, whatever we're doing, what's actually working, what's not working. Let's do more of that. And so be intentionally digging around for positive deviance, to me, makes a lot of sense, right?
And I call it the reverse Las Vegas effect. Whatever goes on here, tell everybody. If it's working, my God, why are you keeping it a secret?
Right.
So then I go
Chadwick.
Chadwick. I was fortunate to spend about 10 years with Bob Chadwick before he died. He was a master at conflict. And so you try to figure out what is the worst possible outcome if we don't solve this problem. If it's about your kids and they're not learning, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if we don't do this? Well, then on the other side, what's the best thing that will happen if we can solve this? Because that gives you your goal. What strategies and actions are you willing to take to make the best possible outcome a reality? There's your action plan.
Mm-hmm.
What will be the evidence that you will see that we're moving toward your goal or not? That's your assessment plan. And when are we going to meet again to discuss this? I think I put in the book where I used this with two people in a two-member department. They hated each other.
Mm-hmm.
I did this for 3 or 4 months. Finally said, this isn't working. One of you is leaving. As I looked at the guy, you can't make me. I said, you ain't going to like the alternative. That was just one that didn't work out. So anyway, so then frisk is, what are the facts? What is what's the rule? How are we going to do an intervention? What's the reward, and what happens? What are we going to learn from it? What's the knowledge? So it's a process that sometimes you just got to get real short and to the point. And then finally, my move, which is the AKA Kita. If it ain't working, now again, 4 times in 40 years have I taken a teacher out before the end of the year.
Right.
It doesn't happen often, but sometimes
you
just have to do it.
So, what are you presenting at TLC this year? We better finish this conversation before your son takes your chair away. Just in case you're wondering who that guy is going by.
Oh, him.
Bill's son is moving in his apartment in New York City, so he's packing up while Bill's here.
I did the 9 professional last year, but I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, I think you should. Yeah.
We had a lot of people in there looking at multiple options, and again, these are more leadership because you do a great job on the instructional strategies. But I think sometimes it just needs a little. There's another layer to it, or especially for leaders. And I'm going to do the responding to resistance.
Right.
I've never done that before, so I'm just going to make it up and do. Emily says I got to do an hour. Okay.
Well, I think the first 4 in particular are going to be really important for any coach. People need to have an understanding of SCARF. They need to understand what cognitive coaching is. Edgar Schein's work is really important. I mean, the temptation to go in and tell the teacher what they did right and what they did wrong is hard because nobody likes ambiguity. Feels good to tell them, but and then I think your reflective work is really key too.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is you go in and tell people what to do, and I'm not saying you don't do that in later stages, but you got to try stuff first. But if it's just I come in and I tell you what's wrong, most people say, "Oh yeah, well you just created dependency, so you tell me what to do next."
Right.
So they take no responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. I call that irresponsible accountability.
So can I ask you a question?
You can, yeah.
So why did you call me? Why did you? I mean, we're friends. I get that, but
right.
Yeah, because you have some big hitters on here. I'm just a principal looking for a job.
Well, you've had a huge impact on my writing. First, you're the beauty of working with you, Bill, is that you don't candy coat it. You really say exactly what you think, and that's
Oh, thank you.
extremely helpful. I always tell my editor, give this book to people who don't like me, because they're going to give me more valuable information. And so, not that that's why you got it, but but because a lot of people, if they like you, they're worried about what you're going to think, or
Right.
people who maybe they're in a different realm. So then I get the reviews back, and I'm like, who are these people? Why could they say such hateful things? And then after about a couple of weeks, I get it out of my system, and then I look at it and I go, okay, well, this is some really valuable information. So I'm grateful for that.
Well,
But,
I'm grateful that you let me read this stuff. I remember your unmistakable impact. You said, I've never been a principal. Would you read this?
Right.
Then it's really hard to read another one.
Yeah,
Cool.
surely another one who would give you the straight goods. But also, because of your depth of knowledge from the reading you've done, you're extremely helpful in terms of just bouncing ideas off. And then as a coach, you help me get better.
Well,
That's how you got
thank you.
paid, but you help me. I think you have to be able to see things that you can't see, and that takes another set of eyes, and the stakeholder coaching, where you go out and interview the people, identify, and then bring back the information, and then coach me through it. That's a really helpful process.
Yeah,
So those are just some of the things. It's really just your loving, warm personality I wanted to be around.
Art Costa, when I was doing a workshop with him in Australia, he says, "You are salty." I said, I try to clean it up, but
Oh, well.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Jim. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it
I
too.
like you well. I like you well enough to tell you the truth.
That's a great phrase. We're looking forward to TLC. You're
me too.
I keep saying it's like Woodstock, but we have big people. Ibram X. Kendi, he's on your list as someone who's a big mentor.
Yeah.
Zaretta Hammond, Michael Bungay Stanier, and then a whole host of coaching experts, from Joellen Killian to Megan DeShannon Moran to Nathan Lang-Rad, and just all of our team.
You got Kendi coming. Coming.
Ibram X. Kendi, that book, that's really a super helpful, powerful. But I mean, you talk about your first thing in here about language. He gives you a vocabulary for understanding racism.
Yeah, did I send you the notes on that? Yes,
you did.
Okay.
And next week, I'm going to talk with a group from NEA. Rowena Schön is my colleague there, but I think a whole team. I hope we've been partnering with NEA to come up with a toolkit and courses they're developing for equity for coaches. So that's our conversation next week. Rowena is going to be at TLC as well. So that's the plan.
I'm going to get more bookshelves.
That's what you need, more bookshelves. They'll have a great time. I hope you don't wear yourself out moving your son, but
I've already done that. This was a break for me. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Jim.
We'll be talking soon. Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.